But as of this year, we have had 175 years since the October 22, 1844 date. And I think that the message about the investigative judgment or the cleansing of the sanctuary has been falling silent in our church to a large degree. And so I feel a burden to keep it alive because it's an extremely important thing for us, especially that now, since that date, we have been living in the time when the most holy place is open. And when he finishes in the most holy place, that's it. Nobody will change their direction after that. And so I'm sure we agree it must be getting close to the end. 175 years, certainly it's getting close to the end. So I've entitled this one, Entering the Most Holy Place, beginning on October 22, 1844. And the Bible records his entering into the most holy place in Daniel 7, verse 9. I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. The picture we are given here is of the Father who has been in the holy place, moves into the most holy place, and the throne that had been in the holy place is now placed in the most holy. And then it goes on, verse 10, a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. The picture we see here is of hundreds of thousands of angels, millions of angels, no doubt, who are all very interested in who's going to be saved from this earth. Because as you know, we have a good angel that's with us all the time and is constantly trying to help us do right. And so they're very eager to see how's this judgment going to turn out. And they all gather around the throne, and God has better records than what on earth. On earth we have to go by eyewitness accounts and different evidence that is found to try to decide a case. But God doesn't have to do that. He has every word, every thought, every deed that we ever did, all on record. And so now he opens up those records and he's going to examine them. I don't know anyone that really looks forward to having to go to court. Especially if you're guilty, you don't really look forward to have to go to court. Even a speeding ticket is a little scary due to the prices that they charge today. And so I don't know anyone that really is excited about the judgment, but it's one of those things that we have to face. And it's better to face this one than the one that we face when Jesus comes in the clouds of heaven. Because in this one, we have opportunity for anyone to win their case if they choose to do so. It's not like, well, you're guilty, so if they find out, you're going to lose your case. No. In fact, your best thing to do is plead guilty and put your trust in the forgiveness of Christ. But in the most holy place, it's not just forgiveness, it's victory over that sin. And he stands ready to help us. Now, it hasn't mentioned Jesus so far, but in verse 13, we have evidence of Jesus. I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man, came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him. Now the Millerites did not catch the full wording of this text. And so they believed that Jesus was coming in the clouds of heaven on that date. And that morning as they woke up, they were thinking excitedly, this is the day that Jesus is going to come. We don't know whether it'll be in the morning, the afternoon, or the evening, but today's the day he's coming. However, a careful look at the words after the disappointment, they began to realize, well, it's not saying that Jesus is coming to the earth. It's saying that Jesus is going to come to the Father. And he's involved in the judgment. In fact, his job is the defense attorney. Satan is the prosecuting attorney. He wants to get your name denied. Jesus is the defense attorney. And the good news is Jesus wins every case if we cooperate with him. He wins every case. Satan doesn't even win one, except the individual that doesn't take advantage of what Jesus can do for them. So then they realized, oh, it wasn't promising that Jesus would come to earth, but that he would begin in this judgment that Daniel 7 talks about. Another text that they came to realize could have helped them had they understood it is in Malachi, and we read that, but I'll read it as it is rendered in Great Controversy, page 424. This coming is foretold also by the prophet Malachi. The Lord, whom ye seek, shall suddenly come to his temple. So they didn't realize. He went in the temple and they didn't even know that he went in. Suddenly he came. The Bible predicted it would be suddenly. Even the messenger of the covenant, whom ye delight in, behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of hosts. That's verse 1 of Malachi 3. The coming of the Lord to his temple was sudden, unexpected to his people. They were not looking for him there. They were expecting to see him in the clouds of heaven, but instead, he joined his Father in the most holy place with all those angels that were with him, and the judgment began. They expected him to come to earth in flaming fire, taking vengeance on them that know not God and that obey not the gospel. That one's from 2 Thessalonians 1:8. So they were thinking that text was going to be fulfilled, and it wasn't until later they realized, oh, God told us that it would be unexpected, that we wouldn't be aware of what he was doing. Now there's a lesson also, because the closing up of the work in the most holy place is going to be just as sudden. And sad to say, there's going to be a lot of people that are totally unaware, but that's a lot worse, because in this one there was still time for them to wake up. But if they don't realize that Jesus has finished the work in the most holy place, it's too late. And so that's why this truth is very important for us to understand, and it's very important to be living in a way that is appropriate for the ministry of Jesus in the most holy place. In John 20, verse 2, we see here's another time when a similar disappointment, in fact, a worse disappointment, took place. And when we look at the heavenly sanctuary, we discover that the court is on earth. The holy place is in heaven, the most holy place is in heaven, but the court is on earth. when Jesus came to die for us, he came to the courtyard and he sacrificed his life in the courtyard. So when the ministry of Jesus changed from the courtyard to the holy place in heaven, the same confusion took place. And it's recorded in several spots. John 20, verse 2, "Then she runneth and cometh to Simon Peter and to the other disciple whom Jesus loved." John didn't want to name himself. He just said, "I'm the one that Jesus loved." "And saith unto them," and you can just imagine the sadness in her voice, "They have taken away the Lord out of the sepulchre, and we know not where they have laid him." Oh no. First he died, and now we've even lost his body. We don't even know where it is. And so in verse 13, she took the news to the disciples, and they said unto her, "Woman," or no, this is not taking it to the disciples, this was the angel. "And they say unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? She saith unto them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I know not where they have laid him." So first she went and talked to the disciples. They were so depressed because he died instead of becoming king that it didn't even really register with them. So she goes back to the tomb, and now she states her problem again to the angels. But then we go into Luke 24, verse 21. It says, "But we trusted that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel." So in other words, we gave up the idea that he was the Messiah because he didn't become king. Instead, he died, and that's the end of it. "And beside all this, today is the third day since these things were done." In other words, we thought he was going to become king, and he's dead. And he said he would rise on the third day, but it's the third day, and he hasn't risen. He had, but they didn't know that he had risen. And so we see the disappointment that took place. Sometimes people criticize Seventh-day Adventists because they say, "You guys are false prophets. You predicted that Jesus would come in October 22, and he didn't come." And I find some Seventh-day Adventists saying, "Well, that wasn't us. That wasn't us. We're not the false prophets." But that's denying the midnight cry. And you remember there was a vision for all those that denied the midnight cry. They fell off the path. So that's not the way to go. But the way to go is we're in the right place as Seventh-day Adventists, because the disciples did the same thing. When Jesus changed from the courtyard to the holy place, they made the same mistake. They thought that Jesus was going to become king, and instead he offered his life as a sacrifice. Now, it's interesting that both times it was the faulty theology of the day that brought the confusion. The Jews taught that when Jesus came, he would become king. The Protestants taught that when those words were fulfilled, that Jesus was going to come to earth and cleanse the earth. When the sanctuary was cleansed, it would be the earth that was cleansed. And so really, it's our fault in a sense that we didn't dig it all out, but nonetheless, we were right on course. It was even God's plan that we not see all that until later. In Matthew 25, verses 5 to 7, it also is talking about this event. Some people try to say there's no evidence in the Bible in regard to an investigative judgment. That's just something the Adventists hatched up. But there's quite a few texts about it, and this is one of them also. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight there was a cry made, Behold, the bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. Now I'm sure you've read the parable. And so later they went in and the door was shut, but there was a period of time before that happened. And so this parable is announcing actually what the Millerites said to the world, and they even understood that part, and they said to the world, Behold, the bridegroom cometh. They thought he was coming to earth, but actually the parable doesn't support that idea if they look at it carefully. But it does show that when the announcement came that they should go to meet the bridegroom, that it was very important what their condition was at that time. Now, in a way, there were two disappointments. There was also one in 1843, and then the final one on October 22, 1844. So we're going to look at the first disappointment. While the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. Notice that everybody was sleeping. No one could say, well, you fell asleep, but I stayed awake. By the tarrying of the bridegroom is represented the passing of the time when the Lord was expected, the disappointment and the seeming delay. So Miller himself had predicted from his study that Jesus would come in 1843. The latest would be in the spring of 1843. And when that did not happen, at that point, these bridesmaids who were, waiting, they fell asleep because he didn't come as soon as what they expected. So then they fell asleep. In this time of uncertainty, the interest of the superficial and half-hearted soon began to waver and their efforts to relax. So we're going to look at the two main groups of people that responded to the message. So in other words, these are all church members. Now, they didn't organize the church. They didn't really want to do that, but they were all called Millerites. So here is the class that was the foolish virgins. Why did they end up being foolish virgins? Because even though they were aware of the message that was being given, they were superficial and they were half-hearted about the message. It wasn't something really important to them. And as a result, we'll see what happened to them. Well, from the parable what happened. Here's the other group. But those whose faith was based on a personal knowledge of the Bible had a rock beneath their feet, which the waves of disappointment could not wash away. So the other group, they had studied for themselves. They knew what the Bible said, not just because the speakers had told them what it said, but because they had studied it and they knew what it said. And so they fell asleep too, but in a different way. They all slumbered and slept. And the second application, which is from now until close of the work in the heavenly sanctuary, that at this moment we probably, if we knew the full situation that we're in, we're sleeping. But that has to change. The sleep was different, though, in the two groups. One class in unconcern and abandonment of their faith. So they said, well, we didn't really believe it anyway. We just were following the crowd. And so it's no big deal to us. It was just one of those mistakes that somebody made. That, of course, is the foolish virgins that reacted that way. The other class patiently waiting till clearer light should be given. So the other sleeping group said, well, we're not giving up. We can see from the Bible that what we thought is right, but there must be something we didn't understand quite right. Yet, in the night of trial, the latter seemed to lose to some extent their zeal and devotion. So that's where we are now. We don't have the zeal and devotion that's appropriate for the message that is supposed to go to the world. But a time is coming when he's going to wake us up. And when that happens, we'll get back the zeal and the devotion, and we will be saying, behold, the bridegroom cometh. The half-hearted and superficial could no longer lean upon the faith of their brethren. So the reason the foolish virgins were in the movement is because somebody else that they believed in or trusted in, they were excited about the message. They thought there was something good in it, and so they also were going along with it. However, each must stand or fall for himself. And so God allows the testing to occur. And the test for us is, we thought he would come a lot sooner. We thought probation would close a lot sooner, and it didn't. And so the virgins fell asleep. In Great Controversy 4:26 and 7 says, in the summer and autumn of 1844, the proclamation, behold, the bridegroom cometh, was given. So the second angel really was started before this time, but finally they woke up and they began to preach that, behold, the bridegroom cometh, with a zeal better and bigger than anything they had done before. And it was like a tidal wave, it calls it. You know what a tidal wave does? And it doesn't take long to do it. It just sweeps in. And that's what happened during those few months from the summer until October 22. The two classes represented by the wise and foolish virgins were then developed. One class who looked with joy to the Lord's appearing and who had been diligently preparing to meet him. Again, we see the wise virgins there, but here's the foolish virgins. Another class that, influenced by fear and acting from impulse, had been satisfied with a theory of the truth, but were destitute of the grace of God. If you asked the foolish virgins to give a Bible study, they would be able to give it. They understood the theory of the truth. But what they were lacking is that they didn't take the truth into their own heart, and they didn't allow Jesus to do for them what the truth was supposed to do. And so they only had the theory of the truth. In the parable, when the bridegroom came, they that were ready went in with him to the marriage. So that's the end of the cleansing of the sanctuary. the close of probation, that's when the marriage occurs. The coming of the bridegroom here brought to view takes place before the marriage. In other words, every name has to be decided on to know who's marrying Jesus. The coming of the bridegroom here brought to view takes place through the marriage. The marriage represents the reception by Christ of his kingdom. Now he does it through the Jerusalem, and you'll see the explanation here of how that works. The holy city, the New Jerusalem, which is the capital and representative of the kingdom. So the New Jerusalem is our representative at the marriage. Is called the bride, the Lamb's wife. Revelation tells us that. Calls the New Jerusalem the bride, the Lamb's wife. Said the angel to John, "Come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife." He carried me away in the Spirit, says the prophet, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. Jesus wouldn't marry an empty city, so the city is the representative for us, and we also, as we'll read in a minute, are the guests at the wedding. Clearly then, the bride represents the holy city, and the virgins that go out to meet the bridegroom are a symbol of the church. So the virgins represent us as believers that are going to the wedding, but there's a tarrying. It doesn't happen as soon as we thought, and so there's a testing time during this tarrying, and the two groups become manifested. In the Revelation, the people of God are said to be the guests at the marriage supper. That's Revelation 19:9. If guests, they cannot be represented also as the bride. Christ, as stated by the prophet Daniel, will receive from the Ancient of Days in heaven dominion and glory and a kingdom. Now that will be us. He's going to receive area of dominion, and he's going to receive glory, and he's going to receive a kingdom. That's in Daniel 7:14. He will receive the New Jerusalem, the capital of his kingdom, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Now they didn't understand all that back then, but it's important for us to understand it. Having received the kingdom, he will come in his glory as King of Kings and Lord of Lords for the redemption of his people who are to sit down. Here's another text that helps us to sit down with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob at his table in his kingdom. That's quoted both from Matthew 8:11 and Luke 22:30. To partake of the marriage supper of the Lamb. So the Old Testament people, as well as those that are New Testament, they all get to sit down at this table and eat together. And Ellen White was shown in vision this table, and it's recorded in early writings, page 19. I saw a table of pure silver. It was many miles in length, yet our eyes could extend over it. So the table is big enough for every saved person. Everyone that passed the investigative judgment is going to be able to be there, and we will have eyes that can see everyone clear to the end of the table. The proclamation, "Behold, the bridegroom cometh," in the summer of 1844, led thousands to expect the immediate advent of the Lord. At the appointed time, the bridegroom came, not to the earth as the people expected, but to the Ancient of Days in heaven, to the marriage, the reception of his kingdom. And so on October 22, 1844, no doubt the name of Adam started, or at least shortly after that, whenever, whether there was any introductory time to get going, I don't know. But Adam's name was brought up, and Eve, and on down through the Old Testament, deciding who gets to be a guest at the marriage supper. They that were ready went in with him to the marriage, and the door was shut. Now we do know there is a period of time in making the decisions. In other words, everyone didn't have to be ready on October 22, but we all have to be ready. Anyone that expects to go in has to be ready by the close of probation. They were not to be present in person at the marriage, for it takes place in heaven while they are upon the earth. The followers of Christ are to wait for their Lord when he will return from the wedding. Notice the Bible wording, that we have to wait until he returns from the wedding to take us to that wonderful table when the reception will occur. However, as I've already mentioned, prophecies in the Bible have more than one fulfillment sometimes. Not everyone, but that's where the Jews got confused, because some Bible verses spoke about the coming of Jesus the first time and the coming of Jesus the second time, and they didn't see the difference between the two aspects. Same is true of this message, behold, the bridegroom cometh. In a pamphlet 20, page 4, I read this. It's in some other places too, but with mighty power the cry is again to be sounded. In our large centers of population, behold, the bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him. And so, once again, there is going to be a loud cry. We have the loud cry of the second angel, and we have the loud cry of the third angel. We know it better as Revelation 18, 1 through 4, but there is going to be another loud cry. And when that is given, no more sleeping. The virgins will be awake. And unfortunately, the foolish virgins will not be giving a part of this message. Right now, I hope there's no foolish virgins in this church, but right now, the Adventist church is divided into two groups: wise virgins, foolish virgins. And we don't know the difference right now, but the day is coming when it will become obvious who is the wise virgin and who is the foolish virgin. At the time when all wake up and are ready to give the message with power. So let's just list what's the difference. And, it wouldn't hurt to pray about it and say, Lord, which group am I in? Because if somehow you ended up in the foolish virgin group, wouldn't you want to know ahead of time so you could change? Absolutely. So we'll look first at the foolish virgins. Number 1, it says, and I've taken the exact ideas that I read to you. The foolish virgins were very superficial in their study of God's word. They were half-hearted in their service of God. There were other things that were equally important, kind of like that chapter of the 2 crowns. I don't know how recently you've read that, but it pictures Seventh-day Adventists And they're reaching for the crown of glory in heaven, but they're also reaching for the crown of glory on earth. They're half-hearted. They're superficial. It's not the most important thing to be, ready for Jesus to come. Second, they leaned on the knowledge of others. So they trusted that so-and-so was a good Bible student, but they didn't check it out to really see, is that what the Bible says? Can I see it for myself? They were influenced by fear. They thought, I don't want to be lost. I want to be ready when he comes. But they were motivated by fear to get ready. And so as long as it looked like, yes, he is coming, they looked real good. But when the disappointment came, all of a sudden the fear left them, and we see the real character of the foolish virgins. Number 4, they acted from impulse. A lot of times we have what we call charismatic speakers. Unfortunately, I'm not one of those. But we have charismatic speakers, and they give a message, and everybody gets stirred up, and everyone starts heading in a certain direction. Sometimes it's not even the right teaching that they're giving, but they're charismatic enough to, carry people along. This group were acting from impulse. And number 5, they were satisfied with the theory of the truth. They didn't have it in their hearts. They weren't. It didn't change their lifestyle entirely, at least as it should have changed it. But they were satisfied to know the truth. Those are warning signals. But here's the wise virgins. Number 1, they were diligently prepared to meet him. They were so eager to make sure they were as ready as they could get with their sins confessed. Sometimes they'd stay up all night to make sure that all their sins were confessed because they wanted to meet him. Number 2, they had studied the Bible evidence for themselves. They knew that their belief was founded on the Bible itself. Number 3, they patiently waited for more evidence. When the test came, they didn't give up. They didn't say, we didn't really think he was coming anyway. They thought to themselves, he'll give us more evidence. He's done a lot for us already. He'll give us some more evidence. They also walked by faith. They weren't going by sight. They were walking by faith during this time. And number 5, they were watching for his coming with joy. To them, the most wonderful thing they could think of was to meet Jesus and to be able to go home with him. Now, why are these 2 lists so important? This is a forecast of exactly what will happen when the message, behold, the bridegroom goes forth in the last days. Now, since the work in the sanctuary is still going on, if we were to discover that we were a foolish virgin, we could change to become a wise virgin. But the day is coming when we can't change. And so it's very, very important for us to examine ourselves. Which group would we have been in if we were back there? If we lived in their time, which group would we end up being in? Well, God wants all of his people to be in the wise virgins. And so he will help us to the utmost extent to be in that group. But it takes the things that the wise virgins did to end up being in that group.